All right, we are live. This is Sound Booth Theater Live. Thank you for coming. This is the cold reads of Legends of Arenia Book 2. We are at page... not page. Chapter. We're at chapter 6, I believe? Yes, chapter 6. And I have to grab some new files here. Where to go? No. I hate it when attachments don't get attached. From forwarding things. Well, Paul gave me some new scripts, so he's saying he will be able to join a little bit later, but he's tied up at the moment. So why can't I hate you, email. This is the dumbest thing. Hope you guys are having a good day so far. I sort of am. I didn't get any sleep last night. It sucked. Let's see. I think if when we get back to the family, we're gonna be shopping for new stuff. Probably furniture. And hopefully some gear. Hopefully the heroes get some actual gear to work with. It feels like a Friday, Goddess? Not to me. Feels like things just got started. There we go. And this one. But I think we're going to be starting this chapter with Turcoletta, which will be fun. For those of you who haven't listened to book one yet, it is on Audible. You can find the link to it down in the description of this YouTube video if you have not listened to it yet. Go pick it up if you wanna, if you're interested in checking it out. Or wait till you hear what this is. Maybe you'll like it better. Even more. I don't know. We'll see. Chapter 6. The Cave. Turcoletta plodded along the bottom of the ravine, her head swiveling about as she stared at the enormous walls to either side of her. With every step she took, the walls kept getting higher, their looming elevation long past the point where her meager powers of flight could have carried her to freedom. Perhaps a smarter animal would have considered turning around as a solution to her predicament, but if she were a smarter animal, she would also be wondering why she was the only animal present in the ravine. Period. Okay, let me make sure. I gotta watch out for Paul, so I'll be coming back and forth to check on him. After an eternity, or possibly 5 minutes given Turcoletta's ability to judge time, spent plodding down the ravine, Turcoletta let out a joyous squawk when she finally stumbled upon the exit. At least, that's what she thought it was. What else could a gigantic cave be if it weren't a tunnel leading back to the forest? I think that was an accurate turkey noise, she exclaimed happily as she waddled towards the cave. Once inside, she discovered that it was warm and somewhat musty, with a rumbling noise a bit like the building where she'd been reared. Well, not exactly the same. The sound wasn't a consistent thrum, instead coming in deep movements that started and stopped at a regular, long interval. The sound of shouting outside the cave entrance startled Turcoletta from her The sound of shouting outside the cave entrance startled Turcoletta from her reminiscence. She instinctively wanted to flee deeper into the cave, but that option was stolen away when a gigantic body inside the cave moved, pressing Turcoletta against the rock wall and sliding her along the worn surface until she was left with her head dangling outside, the rest of her body remaining squished between the rock and the enormous body of the cave's scaly resident. What's up, Tristan? Good to see you. I'm doing very accurate turkey sounds right now. She wheezed, barely able to suck in any breath. She had a great vantage point to see what was going on outside, at least, which in this case consisted of a group of 2 legs standing in a tight huddle. She had a great vantage point to see what was going on outside, at least, which in this case consisted of a group of 2 legs standing in a tight huddle while another of their number, a wrinkly woman with gray hair, approached the cave with a large animal on a leash. When the woman got about halfway to the cave, she stopped and pounded a stake into the ground. God damn it. When the woman got about halfway to the cave, she stopped and pounded a stake into the ground, tying. Who was that text from? When the woman got about halfway to the cave, she stopped and pounded a stake into the ground, tying the animal to it before calmly walking back to join the others. All of a sudden, the world around Turcoletta began shaking as the thing that had All of a sudden, the world around Turcoletta began shaking as the thing that had her pressed up against the cave wall spoke, its deep, rumbling voice emanating at such a low frequency that her eyeballs nearly vibrated out of their sockets. When the rumbling stopped and Turcoletta could think again, she saw the group of people huddled together, their heads pressed together in conversation. Whatever they were saying had the wrinkly woman gesturing emphatically at the cave, but she soon stopped and walked away from the group, crossing her arms and very pointedly not looking at them. One of the remaining group members looked at the wrinkly one for a moment, then shook their head and stepped forward to address the thing in the cave. Whatever they said didn't go over well, as it caused the gigantic creature to roar and flex the rippling muscles beneath its skin, the subtle movement proving enough to squish Turcoletta against the cave wall with increasing force. I'm feeling very turkey accurate today. Anyone have any criticisms of that last turkey squawk? Did that sound like a being crushed turkey to you guys? Turcoletta groaned, her body squeezing. Turcoletta groaned, her body squeezing into a smaller and small... Let's try this one more. Actually, might not... I did. I took turkey in college, did about 3 semesters of it. So, okay, so it's supposed to be a groan. Turcoletta groaned, her body squeezed. Turcoletta groaned, her body squeezing into a smaller and smaller... Turcoletta groaned, her body squeezing into a smaller and smaller space until a ragged piece of newsprint fell to the ground. All right, so I need to go look up. What Turcoletta's. Okay, so maybe if it, I don't know if it's too loud for a groan. No, I'm confident in that. I wouldn't call it a groan, but it feels right. Okay, so yeah, I need to go find out what Turcoletta's smartass AI or smartass spectators sound like. Chapter 5. Interlude. As Angela lay in the forest dirt, bemoaning the fate of her great-grandfather, table from him, the guy was kill me. So now you're in a catch-22. What do you do with an old fart that you can't send back, but who won't agree to move forward? The lawyer frowned. And your family? You're content to never see them again? Jack chuckled. And that kid? Any lives be remaining at the moment of natural death. From a layman's point of view, Jack couldn't see anything wrong with the... Okay, gotta find a Turcoletta. Chapter 9. Magic. Since Angela had fallen... Or I'll hit you! The hell should I know? Hallucinations. Anthropomorphization, Stage 3. -2 will. Auditory, Stage 1. Chapter 10. Vanished the hunted seals, where one or two... There were two more of the creatures there, one of which had blue stripes on its body. As Mark investigated the newcomers, two more creatures came down, but they believe us savages and do not expect us to... Chapter 12. Dragon was. Is there anything we can do? Chapter down. But it's not like that made it hurt any less. Furious at the outcome of her attempt at being a good little druid, Angela picked up her shillelagh and... Chapter 14. Eliza. Buttes are strength, Peter. Onto the platform and awaited Canis's arrival. The Chiandir get large, then die. Chapter 16. Here it comes. You know it, Tome people. I just took down... I don't know where to find it. I have to look it up on the Kindle version. What's up, Type X 0815? Yeah, well, I'm not making stuff up, Effie Rabkin. How dare you even imply that? Turcoletta. This is educated reproductions of turkey sounds. So please don't question my turkey integrity. .5. The turkey repeatedly pecked at the paper, but it kept appearing and disappearing with every movement of her head. Eventually, the turkey's incessant digging became... Eventually, the tree broke loose and plummeted downwards, bearing the turkey with it. Unfortunately for the cougar, this happened at precisely the moment when some dirt had fallen in its eyes, so it didn't see the tree plummeting towards it at an alarming rate. You have slain a level 8 cougar matriarch. Unmonitored legend. No kudos necessary. 4,000 XP earned. Renown level up. Level 2 achieved. Renown level up. Level 3 achieved. Renown level up. Level 4 achieved. Renown level up. Level 5 achieved. XP 4,050. XP to next Renown, 1,050. Strength +1, Endurance +1, Dexterity +1, Willpower +1, Luck +2. Non-sentient species. Base attribute change not allowed. Strength -1, Endurance -1.
Turkoletta doesn't really have a smartass character. More of just a second AI. So
Total body compression imminent. Consulting historical consumption catalog. Appropriate modification identified. Implementing solution. The pressure on Turkoletta abruptly stopped increasing, holding steady until the roaring sound stopped and the thing in the cave relaxed. The pressure on Turkoletta abruptly stopped increasing, holding steady until the roaring sound stopped and the thing in the cave relaxed. When the pressure finally did release, Turkoletta dropped to the ground in a heap, immediately inhaling deeply to get some much-needed oxygen, barely noticing the odd sensation of her feathers unsticking from each other as her chest expanded. It only lasted a moment, though, so she soon ignored it, her focus instead turning to the scene outside the cave. The people were gone. Well, most of them anyway. The wrinkly one was still there, saying something to the creature in the cave. That didn't last long, though, and soon she too wandered away, leaving nothing but a bloody leg tied to a stake in the ground. Turkoletta did a double-take. Hadn't there been an animal attached to that leg? That delicious, delicious leg? Turkoletta took an unconscious step forward, staring at the bloody haunch of meat. She looked at the cave, then back at the leg. Cave, leg, cave, leg. Bringing to bear the full brunt of her farm-raised turkey brain, Turkoletta happily plodded her way over to the ready meal just lying on the ground. Diving in with gusto, she was soon neck-deep in leg meat, entirely oblivious to the enormous, golden eyes that stared at her from within the depths of the cave.
Ominous Turkoletta chapter! All right, cool. All right. I just discovered that Harmon Cooper is writing our director of operations, Sin, into the new Grifty short story because she hates his voice. Really looking forward to that one.
Chapter 7. Death in the Woods. Jack trudged through the undergrowth, his senses on alert in case he drew unwanted attention from the forest's denizens. The Chiandeer had repeatedly emphasized how important it was to always expect an attack, given how damn stealthy some of the predators were. It wasn't like Earth, where animals were generally wary of humans and you could stick a bell on your pack to keep them away. Maybe if you were a 150-kilo Chiandeer warrior, but here it would be little more than a dinner bell for someone his size. But here it would be little more than a dinner bell for someone his size. The other point of emphasis for the Chiandeer had been how things smelled. Great in principle, but the big galoots didn't seem to understand how crappy a human's sense of smell was compared to a Chiandeer's. No matter how much detail they went into, all he could pick up was the heavy scent of cedar and hemlock, and the only thing that told him was that hemlock, and the only thing that told him was that he wasn't anywhere near the pine and spruce of the region where he'd initially been dropped onto the planet, a fact that still pissed him off. He hadn't been happy when the Chiandier explained that their village was so far east of Pueblo that he would need a full day of hiking just to get to where he'd arrived in the first place. Quit your whining, Jack admonished himself. At least he no longer had to make his way around the enormous trees that made up the Chiandier village, even if the towering cedars that replaced them were giants in their own right. They provided a high, shady canopy that was both good and bad, as it kept the underbrush at a minimum while also resulting in a lot of logs and fallen branches to navigate. That turned out to be a bit of a pain in the ass, but at least he had his well-aged trait to lean on, allowing him to still make decent time. A crackle sounded in the bushes to Jack's left, and he immediately ducked behind a tree, his hand unconsciously gripping Sextus's wyvern bone club in case things got physical. He held himself still, barely even breathing for nearly a minute before hearing the animal again as it wandered away into the forest. Whatever it was that had noticed him, it had apparently lost interest, which was about as good an outcome as he could hope for. Jack looked down at the weapon in his hand. Once again, he found himself wondering over Sextus's unusual gift. It wasn't that the Chiandier tribe didn't use clubs. Hell, Jack had been smacked in the head with one the first day he met them, but the ones they did use were heavy, crushing weapons. This one was different. It was sleeker, relying on physics instead of brute force, and the well-oiled leather showed that it had been maintained like a fighting weapon by a man whose fighting days were long gone. Curious. Brushing bark off his shoulder from where he'd leaned against the tree, Jack continued trekking through the woods. Sweat stung Jack's eyes. He reached up to remove his glasses, only belatedly remembering that he no longer wore any. With a shake of the head, he dragged a sleeve across his brow to clear his vision before turning his attention to the thick root clutched in his hand. He grimaced. Then he cut off a piece and shoved it in his mouth.
Oh, God on high.
He muttered, spitting out some of the tuber's acrid juice. He muttered, spitting out some of the tuber's acrid juice just before taking a swig from his water skin and choking it down. On its face, the advice he'd gotten from Sextus about the root vegetables was accurate. The ones with leaves possessing a white underside were pretty good, almost yam-like in flavor. The other ones, they tasted like he'd personally offended their mothers. Unfortunately, those god-awful tubers were the only thing he'd found with any noticeable fiber content, meaning that they'd have to be a staple of Jack's diet if he ever wanted to have something resembling a regular bowel movement. Tick, tick. Jack's head snapped up at the sound. Tick, tick. Whatever it was, it didn't care about being heard. That wasn't a good sign. Things that lived in dangerous environments stayed quiet unless they knew they were the toughest show in town. Tick, tick. When the Chiandier had gotten the better of Jack in their ambush, it wasn't from lack of preparation on his part. It was because he'd ignored instincts that hadn't seen the light of day for 70 years. He didn't make that mistake this time. Throwing his rucksack to the side, Jack dove down the ravine. Rolling and coming to his feet with his club in hand just in time to see a black, spindly figure with yellow markings leap through the space where he'd been having his lunch. Throwing his rucksack to the side, Jack dove down the ravine, rolling and coming to his feet with his club in hand just in Throwing his rucksack to the side, Jack dove down the ravine, rolling and coming to his feet with his club in hand just in time to see a black, spindly figure with yellow markings leap through the space where he'd been having his lunch only a moment ago. Whatever the thing was, it seemed surprised that Jack had moved, allowing him to get a better look at the creature before it realized where he'd gone. It sure was an ugly fellow. The thing stood upright, roughly 5 feet tall, with a deep, black, leathery body covered with yellow striping. Its head was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Narrow and rounded, it had a single oblong compound eye that would have made the creature look like it was wearing a motorcycle helmet if it weren't for the sharp-toothed mouth. Narrow and rounded, it had a single oblong compound eye that would have made the creature look like it was wearing a motorcycle helmet if it weren't for the sharp-toothed mouth that its face split. Narrow and rounded, it had a single oblong compound eye that would have made the creature look like it was wearing a motorcycle helmet if it weren't for the sharp-toothed mouth that split its face so widely that it bordered on the cartoonish. There was nothing cartoonish about the thing's feral gnashing of teeth when it caught sight of Jack, though, nor did he feel like laughing when the beast charged towards him down the slope of the ravine. Jack braced himself for the creature's arrival, only to be caught completely off guard when another tick-tick sounded from his right, followed by a different creature slamming into him and knocking him to the ground. Before he could get back to his feet, the original creature was almost upon him, so Jack lashed out with a 2-footed kick, catching the smaller monster in the chest and launching it in the direction the second creature had attacked from. The thing immediately scrambled back to its feet and charged towards him, only to suddenly disappear with another tick-tick sound that was mirrored from above and behind where Jack lay in the dirt. Jack leapt to his feet and spun around. Nothing. No enemies in sight. He crouched down and looked skyward in case his enemy was above him, but that too was empty. It was as if the creatures had simply disappeared. Not that Jack was fool enough to think that was the case. He'd been in too many fights to assume this one was over, so he quickly made his way down the creek and... Not that Jack was fool enough to think that was the case. He'd been in too many fights to assume this one was over, so he quickly made his way down to the creek and to the open space. Not that Jack was fool enough to think that was the case. He'd been in too many fights to assume this one was over, so he quickly made his way down to the creek and the open space it offered. Once Jack had some area to work with, he looked back up the slope to see if the creature had returned. Once Jack had some area to work with, he looked back up the slope to see if the creatures had returned. As a result, he was just in time to catch another tick-tick sound and witness one of the creatures appear out of nothing, its single eye staring at the spot in the dirt where Jack had been lying when it disappeared a moment ago. Jack shifted unconsciously, the smooth stones of the creek bed amplifying the sound of his movement and causing the thing's helmet-like head to whip in his direction. Tick, tick. The second creature crashed down on Jack from above, the impact bearing him to the ground despite his assailant's smaller size. Even in his perilous straits, Jack still found time to be amazed at how stealthy the creatures were. Hell, for all he knew, the thing had literally teleported on top of him, putting him in the undesirable position of having to fight off two of the things... Hell, for all he knew, the thing had literally teleported on top of him, putting him in the undesirable position of having to fight off two of the things while lying on his stomach.
It is accurate, isn't it? God damn it. Every fucking time I say that word, I rationalize myself into saying it wrong. Every fucking time. I don't know what the hell is the... there's so many words like that for me. I don't know what the deal is with that shit.
Lying on his stomach. Jack tried to roll out from under the creature that had taken him to the ground, but it latched onto his shoulder, biting deeply through the tough leather and pinning him face down in the gravel, trying to immobilize him until the other creature could come finish him off. It was somewhat surprising that the thing hadn't opted to go for the kill immediately, but the reason became clear when Jack noticed a steady dripping of blood onto the rocks. Whether it was the product of an earlier injury or some mishap during the ambush, the wound likely explained the creature's tentative approach. That was fine by him. Even if it was the right decision on the creature's part, it still gave Jack a chance to counter, and he wasn't going to waste it. He had to move fast. Sextus's club was useless in a close-quarters scrap, so he dropped it and pulled out the Chiandier knife instead. He lacked the leverage to do any real damage, but he still made a show of trying to stab the creature clinging to his back as he waited for the one coming down the ridge to get close. Then, just before the creature's arrival, Jack bucked his legs and threw himself into a sideways roll, pinning the bleeding creature between his back and the ground, despite it still being latched onto his shoulder. It was a desperate move, completely exposing his stomach and neck, but Jack was a desperate man. The original creature was upon him in a heartbeat, wholly committed to the killing blow. Jack had banked on that action, though, and managed to get his knife braced on his chest with the blade out, forcing the creature to choose between skewering itself or getting out of the way. That should have been a no-brainer, but either the creature's intelligence or Jack's high luck intervened, trapping the creature in a moment of indecision. Realizing its mistake, but too late to entirely avoid Jack's knife, the creature twisted sideways, the sharp blade dragging across its chest and leaving a nasty 10-centimeter gash in its wake. It wasn't much, just a flesh wound and a little bit of bought time, but Jack would take the moral victory, if not the true one. After all, one creature was still holding him to the ground while another was clawing back to its feet. He'd needed the kill, and he hadn't gotten it. Then, something strange happened. Rather than simply walking over and finishing Jack off, the creature instead ran a few paces away and leapt into the air. There was a loud burst of the now familiar tick-tick sound, and then gone. Jack thudded to the ground as the creature under his back disappeared as well. He sat up quickly, looking around in confusion, but found no explanation for his reprieve. That was 2 times that the creatures had simply disappeared despite having the upper hand in the fight. He was starting to understand why the Chiandier hated fighting these things. Jack scrambled to his feet and grabbed his club, running across the rocky creek bed to the more stable dirt of the bank. He didn't have much of a plan, but he'd noticed that when the first one appeared at the top of the ravine, it had seemed a bit disoriented. Near as Jack could tell, that would be his best chance of giving one of them a good wallop, so he kept a tight watch on the spot where they had disappeared, just in case they came back to the same place. All was silent. Then, with a burst of tick-tick, one of the creatures popped back into existence. To Jack's surprise, the thing didn't appear on its feet. Instead, it was inexplicably lying on its back, right where Jack had been only... Instead, it was inexplicably lying on its back, right where Jack had been only moments before. Of the other creature, there was no sign. Jack took in the creature's state, looking carefully at the gash on its side.
Hey, more peeps. Thanks for coming, guys. Good to see ya.
No, it can't be, he thought. Can it?
Jack batted away the paper that appeared as his mind raced on the edge of understanding. He had a theory, but there was only one way to test it.
Hey, you!
He shouted at the creature. Before it had even finished turning its head his way, Jack spun around and swung his club through what should have been empty space behind him. The wyvern bone club slammed into the second creature's stomach the moment it appeared, air blasting out of its lungs as it was thrown backwards. Jack didn't relent in his assault. He was hardly an expert with a club, but where military training left off, sandlot baseball took over, and that was something he'd played a lot of in his youth. Even still, he knew he wasn't a match for the creature, especially with two of them. But Jack was pretty sure he'd worked out their secret.
4, 5, 6,
he counted out loud. Soon the other creature joined the fight, but Jack made sure to keep an eye on the one that had tried to jump him.
9, 10. I'll bet you have a limit, don't you?
He said to the original one that had appeared on the ground.
13, 14. Go on, head back. I'll be waiting. 18, 19.
Maybe the creature's face was too alien for Jack to read its expression, but its body language left no doubt. It understood what Jack was saying, and it wasn't happy about it. With a flash of well-choreographed precision, the pair of creatures executed a coordinated attack that concluded with the one who had appeared behind Jack disengaging and sprinting away while the other one pressed even harder. Jack disengaging and sprinting away while the other one... Jack wasn't fooled. Rather than engage, he sprinted after the creature that was trying to escape, confident... Jack wasn't fooled. Rather than engage, he sprinted after the creature that was trying to escape, confident that the other one couldn't attack him from behind. That suspicion was confirmed when all sounds of pursuit disappeared, and confirmed even further when the creature in front of him vanished with another tick-tick sound. Excuse me. Immediately, he started counting in the other direction.
25, 24, 23.
He strolled over to where the creature had disappeared. He didn't hurry. He didn't have to. If Jack hadn't watched so much Quantum Leap in the early 90s, there was no chance he would have worked out what in the hell was going on. Fortunately, he'd watched every episode at least twice. Damned networks never should have canceled it. And the secret was that there weren't two creatures at all. There was one, and it wasn't teleporting. It was skipping back in time. All it had to do was spot Jack and then direct its future self to appear in the most advantageous position. The two could then tag-team their enemy, but the original creature would eventually have to get in position for its jump back in time to play the other role. When it did so, the future version of itself disappeared for as long as it took to make up the time debt, then came back in the same spot. Which was why Jack had been counting.
10, 9, 8.
He stepped forward and tapped the club on the ground like he was stepping up to the plate.
5, 4, 3.
He glanced at the head of the club, making sure the flat side was facing forward. Then he lowered into a crouch.
2, 1, 0. Gotcha.
Jack was already driving off his back leg as the tick-tick noise sounded, his club carving an arc through the air as the creature appeared in front of him, its heavily armored head no match for a wyvern bone club smashing into its skull at full swing. A burst of black shadow surrounded the club head at the moment of impact, but Jack was too distracted to think much about it. Apparently, momentum carried through the time jump. It wasn't something he'd considered, and the result was that instead of Jack hitting the creature like he was standing on solid ground, it wasn't something he'd considered, and the result was that instead of Jack hitting the creature like he was standing on solid ground, it was more like he'd hit the thing with an iron bar. It wasn't something he'd considered, and the result was that instead of Jack hitting the creature like he was standing on solid ground, it was more like he'd hit the thing with an iron bar while riding on the back of a motorcycle. The result was beyond impressive and bordering on the theatrical. Not only did Jack's follow-through cause the creature's head to whip back, but it also simultaneously did nothing to slow down the thing's lower body. As a result, the creature's legs flew up wildly as its body went into a 3/4 pinwheel, going almost wholly level before dropping to the ground like a sack of organ meat. It looked like a goddamned Looney Tunes cartoon.
Hey, Garfield's here. What's up?
Tunes cartoon.
Ah, crap,
Jack said, looking down at the corpse. At least he assumed it was a corpse. Even with the thing's helmet-like cranium, he couldn't envision a world where he hadn't just killed the creature. So much for that promise to himself.
Wait a sec.
Jack knelt next to the body. He put a hand on the thing's neck where its carotid would be and was shocked to discover a pulse. Even more surprising, there wasn't a single mark on its head from the blow. Instead, there was simply a pale blue light in the area Jack had hit.
Just how tough is this thing?
A voice spoke up behind him. Okay, so this is a new character.
Not sure what to do with this guy. Let's see. Here's the audio clips. Alright, let's hear. How do you pronounce knocked?
Knocked.
Alright, that's what I figured. Ah, good. Glad you're checking it out. You reading it or are you listening to it, Garfield?
Up behind him. And here I was, thinking you were a pacifist. Jack spun around, jumping to his feet and readying his club.
Who the hell are you?
He started, expecting to see some sort of forest-dwelling humanoid, possibly with hunting gear or armor. What he hadn't expected was a human wearing a crazy, multicolored coat with rainbow stripes on the sleeves and a cubic diamond pattern on the front, surrounded by psychedelic rainbow-colored arrows.
And why the hell are you wearing the jacket from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat?
He finished.
Ah, good. Listening and reading both.
He finished. You like it? The figure said brightly. I've always been fond of it. Normally, death is depicted as such a dour entity. I feel this is about as far as I can get from your stereotypical black cloak and scythe imagery. Jack squinted at the man. For some reason, his hands and face were blurry. Like on Star Trek, where they'd stick a gel on the lens whenever a pretty lady was on screen. He could still make out the guy's expression just fine, though, which was pretty weird. Then there was the matter of who the guy had said he was.
You're telling me you're Death? As in the god of death?
In the flesh, the figure said. Well, what passes for flesh for someone like me? But please, death is merely my office. My name is Knocked.
Death is a musical theater fan?
The god frowned. Is that so hard to believe?
Yeah, it It is.
Well, you'll have to make do. Well, you'll have to make do.
Noct said.
Anywho, what do we have here? He gestured to the creature lying on the ground.
Jack grimaced.
Yeah, I was just hoping to knock the guy out. Didn't factor in that he'd still be moving when he showed up. Thank God he didn't get killed.
You're welcome.
It took a moment for Jack to process the words.
Wait, you stopped him from getting killed?
In a manner of speaking,
Noct said. He pointed at Jack's club.
Recall that your friend Sextus was rather oblique in his description of the flat side of your mace. Oh, that reminds me. Please don't call that a club. Whoever heard of a god blessing a club? What am I, some amateur?
What the heck are you talking about?
Jack said, holding up the weapon.
This is just some hunk of bone with a bit of sentimental meaning.
Oh, dear, no. I enchanted it to only deliver non-fatal damage when using the flat portion of the striking head.
He pondered the sky for a moment.
Dear me, that was quite some time ago. Sextus thought it was lunacy, but he's not a god, is he?
Jack hefted the club and gave it a considering look.
You know Sextus? You know Sextus? You know Sextus?
Everyone knows me eventually, Noct pointed out. The Chiandeer are special, though. They're one of the few who drop by and say hello before dying properly. Sextus managed it differently, mind you, so I'm rather fond of him.
Jack shook his head.
I'm losing my mind,
he muttered. Then he looked down at the comatose creature at his feet and scowled.
Is this thing gonna get eaten if I leave it here?
I imagine they will take care of it,
Noct said, gesturing in a vague circle around them. Jack was about to ask who they were when 6 creatures blinked into appearance in the space the god had just indicated. They all had yellow markings that matched the one Jack had taken down, but 4 of the 6 also possessed additional coloring, with one so laden with extra colors that he looked like he'd borrowed Noct's coat. Jack glanced down at the sparse coloring on the one he'd beaten.
Young'un. Young'un. Explains how I beat the thing so easily.
The creature with the most coloring looked at Noct and then at Jack. As Jack made eye contact, he could feel the intelligence behind that wide compound eye, and something pushed itself into Jack's mind. Not so much words, but an impression of thanks for letting their youth live through the encounter. Not so much words, but an impression of thanks for letting their youth live through the encounter. Bowing towards Jack and the god, the creatures bent and picked up their unconscious fellow and handed the body to one of their members who slung it over their shoulder. Without a word, the group turned and sprinted into the woods.
Huh,
Jack said, watching as the strange creatures disappeared.
Well, guess that's that. See you later, Death!
Clapping the dirt off his hands.
See you later, Death! 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 Death!
Clapping the dirt off his hands, Jack found his rucksack and resumed his hike through the woods. As he left, he glanced back and saw that Noct hadn't moved, even as the past versions of the creatures appeared from the woods. They raised a claw in farewell to Jack, then gathered in a circle and disappeared to live out their future selves' lives that had happened in the past. They raised a claw in farewell to Jack, then gathered in a circle and disappeared to live out. They raised a claw in farewell to Jack, then gathered in a circle and disappeared to live out their future selves' lives that had happened in the past. Or something like that. It was damned confusing. After some
Golden Tiger, AMVs. Hey, Jeff, how's it going? Can't wait for intelligent design. You're absolutely brilliant in the series. Thank you, Golden Tiger. It's coming soon. It's in the polishing stage. It's just kind of wrapping up now, so. We're hoping for soon.
After some consideration, Jack decided it was time to follow the shallow creek. He'd gone far enough west by then that the threat of the river monster at the base of the waterfalls should be over, and the creek bed would hopefully be quicker and guarantee that he was heading for the river proper. Noct appeared, walking on top of the creek.
Why did that happen that way? You're just going to leave? Aren't you curious why I'm here?
Jack raised a bushy eyebrow at the god.
I'm 95 years old. Figured you'd show up eventually.
Yet you think you can simply walk away from death when he comes calling? Is that it?
Of course not. Death is everywhere. Doesn't matter if I'm walking or standing still. You'll be right there. Might as well put some distance under my feet if you're gonna yammer in my ear.
Oh, really? Excuse me.
Noct said.
Noct said. Nope.
Noct said. Noct said. A menacing aura emanated from him, blackening the forest around them.
Some gods might take offense at your presumption, Jack. Do you really wish to invite my wrath?
Bah!
Jack said, waving in annoyance at the god's malevolent aura.
I'm a when your time comes kind of guy. If it's my time, you just go ahead and let me know.
Good!
Noct said brightly, the dour aura disappearing immediately. If anything, his technicolor coat got brighter.
I appreciate a light dusting of fatalism in a person. Are you interested in my offer, though? I'm sure you want to hear it.
Nope.
I'm going to tell you anyway.
A drum roll sounded, and the god hovered in front of Jack. Floating backwards as Jack walked.
I want you to be...
A fanfare sounded.
My cleric!
Jack kept walking, forcing the god to keep floating backwards.
Why the hell would I want to be your cleric?
Noct dropped to the ground, frowning.
Not the reaction I expected. I didn't even prepare a sales pitch.
He vanished and reappeared beside Jack.
You do realize you'd have all sorts of powers, right?
Yeah. I never needed them before. Besides, you're death. Can't say the idea of worshipping death is up my alley, even if you're from a different planet.
Technically, I'm not from a different planet.
Jack raised a bushy eyebrow.
What does that mean?
Exactly what I said. I'm one of the 4 eternal deities. Death, time, force, and magic. We're called Eternals because we were born at the beginning of the universe, and we'll die when it ends. We're everywhere. Always! Isn't that neat? It's very different from the terrestrial deities who are bound to the world they govern. Those are deities like nature, war, forge. You get the picture.
Jack thought about it for a moment.
Makes sense. Ecosystems and rules of war would change from planet to planet, but everything dies. Everything ages. That about right?
Well done!
So why the hell are you one of these Eternals, then? It's not like there were any living things when the universe started.
Oh, Jack, such a biocentric view of the world! Not everything that dies was alive in the conventional sense. It was there during the antimatter genocide, and I'll be there when the last star burns out. One day, I will even preside over the death of the universe itself.
Huh. So, who presides over your death, then?
I don't know, but it's nice to have surprises. You know, you really are asking some insightful questions. Why isn't your intelligence score higher?
You really think I have an answer to that?
No, I guess you wouldn't. Oh well, the system has always been skewed towards book learners. There's never been much acknowledgement of an individual's ability to connect disparate ideas. Ridiculous in my view. But I didn't create the tome, so that's hardly something I concern myself with.
If not you, then who did?
Does it really matter? He asked. The god started jumping from stone to stone on the creek, occasionally wobbling when he happened to land on a rock that shifted under his feet. What matters is that cleric class. You in?
Nope. You seem at least moderately insane. I'm good.
You in?
Nope. You seem at least moderately insane. I'm good.
Paladin? Monk? Templar?
Still not interested.
Well, we'll work something out, the god responded. See you around, Jack. Noct made one more jump, slipped on the stone, and splashed into the water. Despite it only being a few centimeters deep, he sank beneath the surface and disappeared, burbling and spluttering the whole way. Jack stopped and shook his head.
What the hell is wrong with this place?
Boom! That is another chapter in the can. I really love Jack's chapters. The opposite of Anthony and Gandalf. I like that. All right. Get rid of these. Make a new one. Be right back. All right, here goes, new chapter. Oh man, I only spent an hour on those two chapters? That was great. Chapter 8. Exploration.
Can you believe this? Mark said, his voice laden with awe. We live here now. We live here now. He and Angela stood in a busy thoroughfare, staring at the city as they waited to cross the street. As much as Mark had expected Pallmeyer to have a Dark Age or Camelot feel, their first daytime looks at the city As much as Mark had expected Pallmeyer to have a Dark Age or Camelot feel, their first daytime looks at the city proved it to be more in line with Renaissance Florence. The roads were constructed in the same Roman style of irregularly shaped interlocking stone that he'd experienced on the coastal road to the city, with intersections that tended towards wide, circular piazzas rather than crisscrossing grids. At least, that's what the Garden District looked like. Their home had appeared at the southeasternmost point on the cirque that day. Letting them get. Their home had appeared at the southeasternmost point on the cirque that day, letting them get. Their home had appeared at the southeasternmost point on the cirque that day, letting them get to the wealthy. Fuck. Their home had appeared at the southeasternmost point on the cirque that day, letting them get to the wealthiest part of the city by simply heading north over the Incas River. For all they knew, the poor district was a far cry from what they were seeing.
Dude, this is amazing,
Angela said for probably the 10th time since they left the house.
Who pays for all this?
Good question. Mark thought. The huge vaulted arcades that ran between buildings showed off sculptures that would have been at home in the Louvre, while galleries, theaters, and auditoriums were also plentiful, each more grandiose than the next. It had to cost a fortune. It wasn't just the arts, either. There was also It wasn't just the arts, either. There were also green spaces set aside, each with its own theme. Some were blooming gardens, others were ornate water fixtures, while some were forest groves with trees that had to be centuries old. Mark looked at one of the statues nearby.
This stuff isn't cheap, and when rich people foot the bill for something, they usually like to stick their name on it, so...
He walked over to the rather grotesque piece that appeared to depict one man beating another with a severed head. Hopefully it wasn't meant to be taken literally, and glanced at the plaque mounted below.
Mandrival slaying Farron.
He read, Sculpture by Galen Attal through the patronage of Marin Fornax. He looked at the sculpture again.
Jeez, Murphy. Did that actually happen?
Geez, Murphy. What is that from? That's got to be a reference to something.
Get Murphy, not me. Oh. You Murphy, look. You didn't.
No, that's not it. I mean, when I hear the name Murphy, I automatically think of RoboCop.
So, oops. I can't find the quote scene. Isn't Murphy his partner, though? Murphy is the chick, right? From RoboCop?
Did that actually happen?
Let me see if I can... Jeez, Murphy. Jeez, Murphy, did that actually happen? Oh. Okay, so Murphy's Law is if it can happen, it will, right? Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. I don't see how that applies to this either.
Did that actually happen?
Hopefully he'll drop back in, and I've marked it to make sure.
Did that actually happen?
Check this out,
Angela said, pointing at a nearby building.
this theater says Casuronian Public Theater, courtesy of House Glass.
Huh. Well, we know the families are the heavy hitters around here, so I guess House Glass is one of them? Do you think this Marin Fornax belongs to one as well? Angela shrugged.
Who cares? It's just rich people doing rich people things, and I saw enough of that on Earth. I want to see magic people doing magic things.
Her stomach grumbled.
Actually, let's get something to eat. Hey, do you think it will be like in LitRPG books? Hey, do you think it'll be like in LitRPG books where food always tastes so good? I bet it will. Man, I can't wait.
"20 minutes later, Mark and Angela were sitting on a park bench. Mark was picking some sort of bird meat out of his teeth. Probably pigeon, given the cages in the alley, while Angela sat next to him, gritting her teeth angrily.
How does everything have meat?
She said, throwing her hands in the air.
We went to 5 different vendors, and everything had nothing but meat pies.
Everyone.
We went to 5 different vendors, and everyone had nothing but meat pies. Isn't meat supposed to be expensive?
I doubt the ingredients in my pie were expensive, Mark said, already regretting his choice of meal. For the record, it isn't like the books. That was not an enjoyable eating experience. There was a gurgle in his stomach that had him hoping some rich person had branched out from artwork and paid for a public lavatory.
I am inventing curry pies, damn it. This is unacceptable,
Angela grumbled. Or you could start eating meat, Mark noted.
Shut it! You're not Grandpa Jack,
she said, giving him her best stink eye. Mark laughed it off, then cocked his head. Hey. Hey, do you think tracking spells are a thing here? Hey, do you think tracking spells are a thing here? Maybe someone at the Mages College can just wave their hands and tell us where he is. Angela's face lit up.
That's an awesome idea. Let me just finish my nothing burger and then we can go.
Miming the act of chewing and swallowing, Angela wiped her mouth with an imaginary napkin that she shot in the direction of a nearby trash can, only for her face to fall dejectedly. Shaking her head, she stood up and walked over to the trash can, pretending to pick up the imaginary napkin before dropping it into the can.
All right. Now let's go see some wizards.
Hang on there, Tex, Mark said, gesturing to his tattered clothing. I look like the hobo who had to sleep on the roof of the train because he was too low class for the other hobos. No way am I showing up at the Mages College dressed like this. Angela nodded.
Yeah, you do look like hell. You should get new gloves while you're at it. Those ones are way too big.
Mark gave an exaggerated wave. Mark gave an exaggerated wave with one of his big gloved hands. "Heidi-ho, Angie!" he said in his best Mickey Mouse voice.
Heidi-ho, Angie!
he said in his best Mickey Mouse voice.
Yeah, I can barely keep a grip on this staff with these things. Let's see what we can find. Heidi-ho, Angie!
he said in his... Make it less good. He's not a voice actor. Yeah, I can barely keep a grip on this staff with these things. Let's see what we can find. They asked around to see where they could go shopping, but it soon became clear that the Garden District was where you went for a tailor, not the kind of generalist clothier they needed. They did eventually manage to get proper directions to a shop that sold off-the-shelf clothing, though, and were surprised to discover that the best place for mid-range goods was the Chance District. Apparently, it was just the dead center of the district that was still home to gambling halls and other sundry entertainment. The area closer to the edge had developed into more of a general shopping region, its flavor varying based on the nature of the adjoining district, a byproduct of the pedestrian traffic that utilized the unusual road. It took them a half-hour to hike across the city, thanks to more than a little backtracking, but they eventually found the place recommended to them. It was a medium-sized store attached to 2 other shops in a style that was less Florence and more 18th century London. The front door had a small symbol of a horse posted above it, one that Mark recognized from the shop that had recommended this location. It made him wonder if the owners were related. That notion was put aside when they entered and set eyes upon the swarthy fellow. Swarthy, maybe? Should it be smarthy, swarthy,
Swarthy.
Swarthy. What does that word mean? Dark-skinned, okay. That notion was put aside when they entered and set eyes upon the swarthy fellow behind the... That notion was put aside when they entered and set eyes upon the swarthy fellow behind the counter, who was clearly not related to the Nordic-looking guy who sent them this way. Mostly based on the horns. The man looked up from the book he was reading.
How can I help you? What are you wearing? He looked Mark up and down. Did you pick those clothes out of the garbage? No, Mark said. I got in a scrap with a dire rat. A dire rat? He leaned over the counter and looked at Mark's leg. It ripped off your pant leg and left the leg behind? It ripped off your pant leg and left the... It ripped off your pant leg and left the leg behind? Mark's mind went blank. He'd never been able to think up a lie on this himself for not coming up with something beforehand. Fortunately, Angela had no such issues.
He has me to thank. I'm a druid. Nice to meet you,
she said, holding out her hand. The man looked at it awkwardly for a moment before giving it an uncertain shake. Thank you for humbling my shop with your presence, he said once he overcame his initial hesitancy. You must truly be blessed. I have never heard of one of such low renown possessing that level of healing skill. And to come here from so far away. Your abilities must truly be remarkable. Angela darted a glance at Mark, who could only shrug.
Yeah. Thanks. So, clothes?
Of course, the horned man said. Do you need armor, sir? Perhaps some greaves for the next bite, should your friend be unavailable? I am a humble clothier, but I can recommend another Equus establishment if necessary. For the second time, Mark and Angela exchanged confused glances. Equus? Mark asked. Now it was the shopkeeper's turn to look confused. Aren't you in the service of House Equus? No. No? Is that a problem? The man looked flabbergasted. Of course it is. Then he seemed to come to some realization. Ah, that explains why you shook hands instead of breaking spines. You are new to town. Recently arrived on a ship, perhaps? He shook his head. Look at me prying. No need to answer that. Now, here is how stores work in Palmyre. Every store is owned by one of the families. Fornax, in the case of this establishment, as they are the ruling family of House Equus. Fornax, in this case. Fornax, in the case of this establishment, as they are the ruling family of House Equus. Technically, you can shop anywhere you like, but I recommend only shopping at establishments owned by your employer. Otherwise, you would have to pay additional fees back to your employer for shopping outside the family, plus out-of-family city taxes. Have you already taken service with a different family, perhaps? Mark held up his hands. Man, I barely understand what you're talking about. We literally just moved here. In that case, things are much simpler. All you have to pay is out-of-family fee. All you have to pay is the out-of-family fee, which works out to 10% on top of the list price. 10% sales tax isn't great, but it could be worse, I guess. Perhaps I wasn't clear. That's 10% on top of the 15% sales tax. Mark's jaw dropped, while Angela snorted loudly.
25% taxes, she said incredulously. Holy crap, maybe we should take a job with these Equus guys just to get in on the discount.
The man's face screwed up and his eyes started to tick. The man's face screwed up and his eye started to tick. He glanced around the empty store as though ninjas might be lurking behind the underwear. He leaned across the counter. Never work for the families, he said, his words coming in a whisper so soft that Mark could barely hear him. He said, his words coming in a whisper so soft that Mark could barely hear him. "Not even as a last chance. If you do?" The door to the store opened, and a smile appeared on the shopkeeper's face. "Yes, of course you need clothes," he said cheerily. Yanking a random bag of clothes out from behind the counter, he shoved it in Mark's direction. "Here are some nice garments. Have a wonderful day." Mark looked awkwardly at Angela. But she didn't say anything, opting instead to simply count out payment for the shopkeeper. There was a chance she was trying to cover for the horned man. But it was equally likely that she simply thought it would be funny if Mark had to scrounge clothing from a random bag of mismatched goods. Thanks for all your help," Mark said, waving to the man as they left. It took some doing, but he suppressed the urge to say anything until they'd put some distance between them and the store. He turned and looked at his sister. "So..."
Yeah, that was super weird.
Angela agreed, glancing back towards the store. "No doubt. I think Mom's onto something with her stay clear of the families thing."
Def, there's something weird about this city.
She paused, letting the sentence hang in the air. "What?"
Wait for it,
she said, holding up a finger. Nothing happened. "What am I waiting for?" Mark asked, but Angela waved at him impatiently.
No, I refuse to accept this, she said, crossing her arms. We just randomly walked into a store where a weird shopkeeper started to give us a warning, but got cut off before he could finish his sentence. It is going to happen.
Mark waited. And waited. And waited. He sighed. We're not getting a quest.
It is going to happen.
Mark waited. And waited. And waited. We're not...
Ah!
she said, pointing at the sky. She shouted.
You suck, magical tome people!
Mark cringed. Jeez, Angie. Quests are cool and all, but screwing around with the tome guides is probably a bad idea.
You worry too much.
You worry too little.
And that's why we stick together. Come on. What's the worst that could...
Mark mashed his hand onto Angela's face, her eyes going wide.
What's the worst that could... Come on. What's the worst that could... Come on. What's the worst... Come on. What's the worst that could... Stick together. Come on. What's the worst that could...
Mark mashed his hand onto Angie, he growled, glaring at her. She snirked out a giggle and nodded, so he removed his hand. She shook her head.
I can't believe I almost said that.
He pursed his eyebrows and frowned at her. Pointing at the bag, he simply said, "Clothes. Now." Angela nodded and loosened the string holding the bag closed. They both looked inside.
Oh, wow,
she said once their eyes took in the contents.
This is too good. I didn't think my luck was high enough to bring me such joy. I didn't think my luck was high enough to bring me such joy.
Something tells me your luck isn't what's at play here, he said with a scowl. Simply put, the bag was an awful, insane assortment of wildly colored, flamboyant clothes. They looked like the illicit love child of a traveling circus and a rainbow.
At least there's gloves,
Angela said with a shrug. Seriously? He asked, holding up the flower print gloves. I'm going to wade into battle with gardening gloves?
Beats the alternative.
He frowned. She had him there. Let's just find an alley I can get changed in, he said, snatching the bag out of his sister's hand and storming off down the street, doing his best to ignore his sister's laughter. There weren't many good places to hide and get changed, but Mark eventually found an enormous statue of what looked like a beaver in plate armor hide and get changed, but Mark eventually found an enormous statue of what looked like a beaver in plate armor fighting a dragon. There was a bit of space behind it and the alley wall, so he squeezed into the gap and swapped out his clothes for the best he could find in the bags. There was a bit of space behind it and the alley wall, so he squeezed into the gap and swapped out his clothes for the best he could find in the bag's admittedly pathetic collection. He stepped out into the open and looked at his sister, whose face split into a wide grin. Yeah, I look like an idiot, he said, He beckoned to himself with both hands. Come on, get it out of your system. The sooner you've done your jokes, the sooner we can go. Angela frowned.
Oh, that's mean. If you're willing to take the abuse, it sucks all the fun out of it.
Seriously? Man, I gotta mentally bookmark this approach. Seriously? Man, I gotta mentally bookmark this approach. Man, I gotta mentally bookmark this approach. He stopped the moment he felt the seizure, raising a finger to his sister to signal what was happening. It wasn't one of the grand mals that had plagued him since arriving on Arenia, but one of the smaller, simple focal seizures that had made up the bulk of his episodes before he got them under control. They were a bit of an oddity in the seizure world, manifesting as a complete stripping away of all means of communication until the seizure ended. Verbal, auditory, written, anything he said would come out garbled, and anything said to him would sound the same way, so there was no point talking. Instead, all he could do was stand there, feeling stupid. Something occurred to him. Gesturing as best he could for Angela to stay on lookout, Mark ducked back behind the statue and pulled off one of his gloves. Taking a breath, he grabbed the smooth wood and watched as the whorls sprang into being across his skin and staff. He closed his eyes, searching for the connection he'd found during the fight with the Nym. His eyes snapped open. It was there. The staff's hunger for the resonance within Mark's seizure. In an action he wasn't sure he'd ever be able to describe, he let that resonance release, feeling as it flowed through his whorl-encrusted hands, and into the staff. Its release, feeling as it flowed through. The seizure ended. Holy shit. Did that work? Mark struggled to tamp down his excitement. He knew there was one more important step left, but he was already way further ahead than he'd expected after one attempt. Still, in for a penny, in for a pound. Bracing himself for what could end up a catastrophic magical explosion, Mark yanked his hand away, breaking contact. Nothing. The lights faded. Maybe a bit slower this time.
But other than that, there were no signs of change whatsoever.
You okay, bro?
Angela called out.
Yeah,
He said, his voice shaky. Why hadn't anything happened? Had it really been that easy? On the road, it had felt like he'd created a bomb, but now the staff looked, well, inert. The implications were profound. If the backlash he'd experienced in the fight against the Nim had simply been from overloading the staff's capacity, that opened up the possibility of using his staff as a kind of magical battery. It was a complete game-changer. Angela joined Mark behind the statue just as he was putting his hand back on the staff.
What are you doing?
She hissed.
Someone could see you. What are you doing?
She hissed.
Someone could see you.
Shh, he said. He said, focusing on the staff. The resonance was still there, buried inside the wood. The only question was whether he could use it. He glanced at Angela. Keep talking.
What? Why?
Seriously? He said incredulously. Usually you won't stop.
Fine. There once was a man from Nantucket. He lived home alone with a bucket. No, wait. Was it a bucket? Of course it was. It's a limerick. But bucket doesn't rhyme with midair, so how did that go? I think it was...
Mark stopped paying attention to what she was saying. All that mattered was if he could understand it. After all, his whole plan hinged on being able to pull... After all, his whole plan hinged on being able to pull colored... After all, his whole plan hinged on being able to pull... After all, his whole plan hinged on being able to pull stored resonance out of the staff. If that resulted in his seizure returning, it would have significant implications for his magical aspirations. Bracing himself, Mark focused on the resonance in his staff. Pulling it towards him. A thread broke free. Mark grunted as the disorientation hit him. There was a brief, almost hallucinatory sensation of being surrounded by a twinkling of stars, like when you got hit on the head too hard, but his sister's words stayed clear and legible. Confident that the seizure wasn't going to return, if somewhat disoriented, he focused his awareness on the field. He focused his awareness on that field of stars and how it felt like he was traveling through them, how some of those lights seemed to slide into his path while others disappeared to the wayside. Mark tried to get a better look at one of the stars before it vanished, but the moment he did so, the wild resonance inside of him reached out and grabbed the light, pulling it from the wider field of view and into his path, causing a shudder in the reality around him. His pants fell apart.
Hidden Quest. Touch the Primal. Completed.
All right, so I gotta go look up Mark's snarky AI spectator voice thing.
Chapter 6. Mark. The drop onto Arenia inevitably produced a wild array of reactions from the human experiencing it. Screaming, terror, excitement, laughing, loss of various bodily functions, even cool indifference. As a result, gambling on the drops was a favorite pastime of the observers, and a great deal of money changed hands with every transfer. One particular reaction paid out the largest odds, and that was because it had only ever paid out a handful of times. Today was one of those days, because when Mark came to a sudden and abrupt halt on Arenia's surface, he showed the rarest of reactions. Sadness. Because for Mark, the idea of being smashed into the planet was far preferable to the reality he was facing. Mark sank to his knees, not even looking at his surroundings. His head bent, and tears flowed, eventually forcing him to brace his hands against the ground to keep from keeling over. He could feel the cool moss and the root-filled dirt beneath his fingers, but those were outside things. Right now, Mark was living inside his own mind. How long? That was all he could think. When Mark was 12, he had been normal. That's how he thought of it. A lot of doctors tried to tell him not to think in terms of normal and not normal, but that line of thinking never stuck. There was a clear before and after, and if one of those was going to be called normal, it was before. Before a month after his 13th birthday, when he stood up in front of his class for a presentation, and all that came out was a garbled mess. How long until it starts again? He couldn't stop asking himself that question. Withdrawal would be harsh. You were supposed to gradually titrate your medication down, not go cold turkey. How long until it starts again?
Here we go.
No! Mark admonished himself. Moment. Mark congratulated himself on a maneuver that he'd been sure would slow his opponent down. After all, rats weren't overly known for their jumping prowess. Unfortunately, a quick look back showed that the giant rat was just as proficient as its smaller cousin at squeezing through tight gaps, as evidenced by the fact that it was now crawling out of a hole in the pile barely a quarter of its normal body width. It was hardly an ideal outcome, but it at least gave Mark an idea. An insane, stupid, desperate idea, but the best idea he could come up with. Doubling down on his own stupidity, Mark continued down the steadily narrowing ravine, ignoring any exits in favor of finding a spot to... Yeah, it was a crappy pen, but a hell of a lot better than what he'd expected. He'd been 90% sure he was going to have to use a quill and ink. Immediately, he jotted down a list of supplies. Mark's stuff. Bedroll ×1. Waterproof cloak ×1. Change of clothes ×1. Rations ×9. Camp knife with sheath ×1. Fish hook ×2. Fish line, around 50 meters, ×1. Water skin, full, ×1. Flint and steel, ×1. Torch, ×2. Silk rope, around 20 meters, ×1. All in all, it was kind of...
New general skill learned. Writing. Skill level 22. Tier 2.
You're not as dumb as you look. Okay.
And with
that's
14
right. Mark has quantum. Mark has quantum accompanying him.
Completed.
All right.
Completed.
What the? I don't... What the... What the... I didn't trigger this prompt. I don't even know what that means. Oh, gods. Please don't tell me you call your you-know-what the primal. Oh, God. Oh, gods. Please don't tell me you call your you-know-what the primal.
Reward 1000 XP. New ability acquired. Warp.
Okay, I've never even heard of that ability before. This is getting ridiculous.
Requirements?
Shruggy face.
50 XP earned.
And so the guy says, "No, I'm laughing because Bob was carrying a watermelon."
Angela's monologue cut off abruptly.
Bro?
Mark looked down, barely processing the message that had appeared. Somehow, all the threads in his pants had decayed into nothing, leaving them a tattered ruin at his feet. He said, summarizing his feelings with appropriate eloquence. Realizing that he was now standing in the street in his underwear, he picked up the bag of clothes and scrambled to find something else to wear.
Did you just make your pants fall apart?
Not on purpose.
Kind of a weird spell.
It wasn't a spell. It was like a...
Mark shook his head.
I can't explain it. I don't think I could make it happen again.
Too bad. I can think of some instances where it'd come in handy.
She wiggled her eyebrows. God, you're weird, he muttered, shaking his head as he rummaged through the bag.
Not as weird as your spell list.
You don't even have a spell list.
I'm different. I have runes.
No, you have a 4-piece puzzle that's still in the box.
She scowled at him.
Fuck, whatever. Can we go?
He grinned. She can... Okay, let's see if this is an actual country song here. All right, so I got to do a country song here. I don't see... Have any of you guys ever heard a country song that goes, she can dish it out, but she can't take it. She thinks she's so smart, but can't fake it? I don't see anything like that. Did a little search, can't find anything. Let's see if Paul left any notes about that. Covers. I don't see nothing.
All right. I sent him a question and oh, there he is. Yeah, Paul, what's up? I was wondering if this is an actual song. She can dish it out, but she can't take it. Or is this just him making shit up to make fun of her? Okay, cool. With feeling. Got it.
She can...
She can dish it out, but she can't take it.
He sang in a country twang.
She thinks she's so smart, but can't fake it. She's Angela.
Oh, fuck right off,
she said, snatching the bag of clothes from his hands. She headed back into the street.
Let's go, bro. Daylight's burning. Let's go, bro. Daylight's burning.
Angie!
Mark shouted, peeking out from behind the statue.
I'm walking,
she called over her shoulder, her voice fading as she disappeared down the street.
Angela!
He gritted his teeth.
God damn it, Angela! I still don't have any pants! He's given her the gears. I'm not familiar with that expression. Ah, gotcha. She thinks she's so smart, but can't fake it. She's Angela.
Oh, fuck right off.
All right. Yes, this is live.
Chapter 9. Looking for the Forge.
Excuse me, can you help me?
Beth asked a man as he walked past. He was dirty, with a face covered in soot and the clothes to match.
Out of my way, trash,
the man said, looking at her and Peter with disgust.
Out of my way, trash,
the man said.
It's a little...
Out of my way, trash,
the man said. Beth scowled as she made eye contact, already knowing what she would see. Name, unknown. Species, unconfirmed. Human, suspected. Renown, level 17, Stoker. Specialty classes unknown. Base stat average, 20.5.
Ugh,
Beth said.
it's so frustrating. I don't even know what a stoker is.
I'm pretty sure it's a person who stokes a fire, Peter said. Shoveling coal, that kind of thing. Beth spun on him.
Are you kidding me? He's a coal shoveler? Then why is he acting like he's on his way to a Yale alumni luncheon and I'm a protester shoving a sign in his face?
Peter gave a resigned shrug. It's just like when we were coming into town, remember? Renown is everything. Granted, I wouldn't have thought it mattered when asking for directions, but here we are.
He's only 4 levels above me.
Beth grumbled half-heartedly.
He's only 4 levels above me.
Beth grumbled half-heartedly. She knew her annoyance wasn't based on a single bad interaction. It was the product of more than an hour spent asking for help and repeatedly being rebuffed despite having found the Temple District's blacksmithing region with relative ease. Now she was tired, grumpy, and, quite frankly, sick of their current approach.
You know what?
She said to her husband.
Forget it. If nobody will help us, I'm trying something else.
Before Peter could stop her, Beth climbed onto the edge of a large fountain. Turning to face the people passing by, she hollered,
I'm looking for Darius the blacksmith. Does anyone know where Darius the blacksmith is?
Jesus, Beth, Peter said, covering his face with his palm. Don't ever say that Angela gets it from me. Don't ever say that Angela gets it from me.
I'm looking for anyone know where Darius the blacksmith is.
Jesus, Beth.
Beth snapped her fingers and pointed at him.
Covering the eyes. Good idea. That way they can't check our renown. Covering the eyes. Good idea.
Holding her hand over her own eyes, Beth resumed her shouting.
I said Darius the blacksmith. Does anyone know him? He isn't tall, but he is very wide and muscly. He is...
Beth was distracted when a young boy covered in black soot began yanking on her pant leg.
Hello?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
The boy said brightly. Beth hopped down off the fountain.
Do you know where we can find a blacksmith named Darius? Course I do,
The boy said with a laugh.
He's my dad.
Oh, yeah, okay. This is, nope.
Hello?
The boy said
Course I do.
The boy said.
He's my dad, remember? I met you folks yesterday. Is Mr. Mark with you?
The words took Beth aback. The boy was at least shaped like Darius's son, but he was so dirty that he practically looked like a silhouette.
Gavin?
She asked. When the boy nodded, she gave him a big smile.
Sorry, I didn't recognize you. No, Mark isn't with us. He's going to the Mages College with his sister. Oh, wow. I'd love to see that,
Gavin said brightly. Beth's mom sense went off.
By that do you mean it's an impressive building you would have liked to show them?
She asked. Gavin shook his head vigorously.
Nah, it ain't much to look at, really. It ain't much to look at, really, but seeing him try to toss out Mr. Mark, that'd be levels. Do you think he'll blow the place up or something?
Peter shot a look at Beth, then back at Gavin. Do we think Mark would blow up the building? How on earth could Mark blow up a building? The boy cocked his head.
With his magic powers, Rit. With his magic powers, silly. Just like he did to the gnome. Just like he did to the Nim.
Magic powers? Beth asked. Nim? Peter added. None of this conversation made any sense. Before they could ask any more questions, a great bellow cut across the plaza.
Lad! What are you doing yammering to these?
The moment Darius spotted Beth and Peter, his face split into a huge grin.
Well, if it ain't the Sullivans, I thought I might be seeing you soon. Where's the lad?
He's blowing up the Mages College, Da,
Gavin said. Darius looked down at Gavin, then up at them.
Why would he do that?
Beth couldn't help but notice how Darius had asked why, rather than how, Mark might blow up a building, which was disconcerting.
Mark isn't blowing anything up. He's just doing some sightseeing with his sister,
she said warily.
How did Gavin get the impression that our son can do magic? How did Gavin get the impression that our son can do magic?
Oh, I thought I sent it already, sorry. Oops. Derpy derp. Somehow I forgot to paste it in that email. Okay, I emailed the link to you.
Magic? Because of what he did to them,
the boy said.
It was wicked. It was wicked. He was all like glowy, and then... It was wicked. It was wicked. He was all like glowy, and then
There he is. What's up, Paul? Sorry about that.
Hey. The Matt, I missed two of my favorite chapters.
Oh, man. Yeah, that sucks. So the Turkey chapter was very short, but then we had the Jack chapter that was the warping, the warp beast thingies. You know what they reminded me of? The Vortigons from Half-Life.
Yeah, I did not think of that when I made them, but yeah.
Single eye right in the top of their head, teleporting everywhere. I just now thought of it, actually. It's like, oh, yeah. You know what that reminds me of? Okay.
It was wicked. He was all like glowy, and then
Gavin's words were cut off by Darius's meaty hand covering his mouth.
Not a word about that, lad,
he said, his voice a low growl.
If Mark wants to share, then he shares. But it's not up to the likes of ye to be deciding what he tells folks. We've made that clear to you already. And you know why? So you mind your mouth. You understand?
Darius removed his hand, and Gavin nodded sheepishly.
Sorry, Da.
Could, we back up for a moment? Peter said with no small concern in his voice. If Mark's in trouble, we should know what's going on so we can help him. For some reason, the comment made Darius chuckle. If Mark's in trouble, we should know what's going on so we can help him. For some reason, the comment made Darius chuckle. And so we can help him. For some reason, the comment made Darius chuckle.
Sorry to jump in. Could you make Darius's chuckle more like deep, than like a snicker?
Okay.
On so we can help him. For some reason,
How's that? Or lower than that?
No, that's good. Thanks.
Okay.
What's so funny? Peter asked. Darius shook his head. I'm laughing, 'cause you think you could help that lad if he got into trouble. I'm laughing, 'cause you think you could help that lad if he got into trouble. Trust me, your boy can handle himself. That hasn't been the case in the past, Peter said pointedly. Darius looked at him sideways. Aye. Then we'll agree to disagree. I suggest you leave him be, though. If he wants to share with you, he will. A grown man is entitled to his secrets, even from his parents. Peter frowned. I appreciate what you've done for Mark, and it's clear that he helped you out somehow, but he's still got some maturing to do before I'd consider him a grown man, as you say. He's either a grown man or a dead one, Darius said bluntly. Peter made to respond, but Darius forestalled him with a raised hand. I don't mean to step into your family's business. That ain't my place. But you need to understand, this city ain't like where you came from. At Mark's age, he needs to be a grown man if he wants to survive, and from what I seen, he can handle himself. Unfortunately, at Mark's age, he needs to be a grown man if he wants to survive, and from what I seen, he can handle himself. Unfortunately, that puts you in a bit of a bind, 'cause you think he's a boy, and he thinks he's a man. But there ain't a man alive who went and saw himself as a boy after seeing himself as a man, so you'd best decide when to start agreeing with him. 'Cause he's never going to start agreeing with you. Before either Beth or Peter could respond, the broad, jovial smile returned to Darius's face. Now, follow me to my humble little forge, he said in his usual... Now, follow me to my humble little forge, he said in his usual booming volume. Rosie won't be back for a while, but she'd murder me if I showed you a stitch less hospitality than if she were home. Without waiting for a response, Darius trudged off the way he'd come, exchanging pleasantries with the surprising number of people who waved hello to the gregarious, if direct, man. Beth looked at Peter to see how he'd taken Darius's words. She expected anger, but to her surprise, he seemed somewhat contemplative. It was a positive sign. Beth had hoped that their unusual situation would help her husband and son get past their differences, and if it didn't, well, maybe knocking their heads together would get her a new skill. Peter noticed her looking at him and sighed. Yeah, I know. Might as well follow him. They jogged after the broad blacksmith, following him down a short side street to a new area where the air rang so loudly. with the sound of hammer on metal that it made Beth cringe. From a city planning perspective, it probably seemed like a good idea to have all the smiths operating in a single location, but from a practical standpoint, the sound of 100 different smithies occupying the same city block left her wondering how any of these people had any hearing remaining. Darius led them towards a corner lot that was organized a bit differently than the surrounding smithies. While those tended to have a larger workspace with a small attached house, Darius's smithy was barely larger than the house, despite being on a larger lot, with about a quarter of the land remaining empty.
How were you able to hear us?
Beth shouted to Gavin. The boy turned to her and cupped his ear.
What? What?
Her voice trailed off when they stepped onto Darius's land, and she found herself yelling in relative silence.
What just happened?
She asked, looking back to the street. The typical city sounds still surrounded them, but the clanging of metal... The typical city sounds still surrounded them, but the clanging of metal being hammered had vanished. Darius grinned.
Blacksmiths have a skill to cut down the noise, but that ain't much help for the family. The wife's got a touch of the fae in her, though, and this is a little bit of the magic she was able to put together. The wife's got a touch of the fae in her, though, and this is a little bit of the magic The wife's got a touch of the fae in her, though, and this is a little bit of the magic she was able to put together. It annoys the mage folk something fierce, but with me being the only blacksmith in Polmire that can forge rain metal, they put up with it.
Rain metal?
Beth asked.
Aye, they mine it down south. It was actually on a run to restock my supply when I bumped into your son. I was actually on a run to restock my supply when I bumped into your son. Holds magic incredibly well, but hard to work with. I got drunk in a bar with a jackal-headed fella in my younger years and woke up with a hangover and a demon of a quest. I got drunk in a bar with a jackal-headed fella in my younger years and woke up with a hangover and a demon of a quest. Took me the better part of 10 years, but I eventually learned how to forge the stuff.
You haven't taught anyone else?
Peter asked. Sure, I'm teaching me boy, he said with a big grin.
Gavin's jaw dropped, and his face flushed in a grin that was the spitting image of his father.
You're going to teach me to work rain metal?
Of course, you daft lad, Darius said. Just as soon as you get to master with your blacksmithing skill.
Gavin looked crushed.
But that'll take years.
Course it will. You'll probably have your own kids by the time I start teaching you. I try before then, and you'll be doing as... I try before then, and all you'll be doing is working your arm. The metal won't budge for less than a master.
Gavin responded by plopping down on a stool and crossing his arms, deliberately not looking at his father, eliciting a chuckle from Darius.
Where is Rosie, anyway? Beth asked, looking around the place. With Eliza out of town, I don't know any women in the city. I was hoping I might chat with her for a bit.
Aye, you'll have to wait for that. She's visiting some family, as it were, so you're stuck with me. Anything I can do for you folks? Aye.
We do have a couple of questions,
she said, looking at Peter. More than a couple.
That's true. Our most immediate concern is a simple one, though. Our house doesn't have any furniture.
Ah, I can see how that'd be a problem,
Darius said. Then he gave her a wink.
And what do you think of the location?
She frowned.
It was a surprise, to say the least.
Darius's laugh boomed through the shop.
I'll bet it was. Living on the circle of chance will keep life interesting, that's for sure. As for furniture, well, sorry to say that's going to cost you. No way to avoid it.
Beth nodded. It was hardly a surprising answer, so she took off her pack and pulled out her grandfather's ancient silverware. The shop.
We do have...
Paul, did you say something? Never mind.
We do have this to sell,
she said, handing it over.
What do you think?
I don't know how much silver is worth.
Darius inspected the cutlery with a keen eye, taking in the minute details. Seemingly satisfied with what he saw, he headed into the forge and returned with a magnet. He tapped it on one of the knives a few times before nodding to himself.
Aye,
he said, without taking his eyes off the heirloom.
Precious metals ain't my specialty, but, best I can tell, this is as close to pure as you'll get with cutlery.
That's great news,
Beth said. She hadn't mentioned it, but she was worried one of her ancestors might have overstated the purity.
Can you sell the silver?
Darius finally looked up at them.
Aye, I could.
We do have...
Come on now.
Aye, I could, but you'd be fools to sell this for the silver. Aye, I could, but you'd be fools to sell this for the silver. Most of the value in these pieces is in the craftsmanship. Most of the value in these pieces is in the craftsmanship. It's some brilliant work you have here. It ain't a full set, but one of the families would happily take it off your hands. Probably save it as a display piece and get a silversmith to make a matching set to eat with. There's nothing the families love more than showing off There's nothing the families love more than showing off something nobody else has.
He gestured with the fork he was holding.
You want me to handle the sale? I won't be able to get you the kind of deal a specialist would, but you show up with this and they'll have a lot of questions for you about where it came from.
I would love that,
Beth said, with Peter nodding in agreement.
Will it be enough to buy our furniture?
Aye, and then some. You ain't the employee of a family, though, so you'll pay a tax. That'll eat up a good chunk of the proceeds, unfortunately.
Beth couldn't help but notice how Darius pronounced employee, but Peter seemed oblivious.
Aye, and then some. You ain't the employee of a family. And then some. You ain't the employee of a family, though. That'll eat up a good chunk.
It's meant to be said like as though you were doing air quotes in conversation.
Right.
Aye, and then some. You ain't the employee of a family, though, so you'll pay a tax. That'll eat up a good chunk of the proceeds, unfortunately. That'll eat up a good chunk of the proceeds, unfortunately.
Beth couldn't help but notice, but Peter seemed oblivious.
What if I did work for one of the families?
He asked, leaning forward. Darius raised an eyebrow.
If you did,
he said with a dry laugh.
If you did, he said with a dry laugh, then I'd say you'd made a huge mistake. If you did, he said with a dry laugh, then I'd say you'd made a huge mistake.
But why, specifically? Eliza said not to get entangled with these people, but my skills are best suited to business. From my understanding, that means the families. How can I avoid working with them if the alternative is poverty? Darius grimaced, considering Peter's words.
If you get in at a high enough level, maybe it'd be okay. But that comes with its own risks. You don't have any debt, at least. That helps. But you gotta be right careful about any contracts they ask you to sign. The families get their power from having workers, and once you're in, they don't make it easy to leave.
Peter's eyes darted to Beth, then back to Darius. But you don't have an explicit reason why I shouldn't work for them? Darius ran a hand over his head.
I could give you reasons, but as you say, it's also about your options. Everyone needs to make money.
Beth shook her head.
I don't like it. It feels like joining the mob.
The mob?
It's an organized crime group from Earth. Darius erupted into laughter.
Organized crime! I like the sound of that. Makes what they do sound all professional and clean. In that case, yeah, I guess you could call it a bit of organised crime. Excepting that they write the laws, so nothing they do is illegal.
Then why would Peter ever work for them? The man shook his head and muttered to himself. Beth could entirely make out what... Probably couldn't. Yeah. Beth couldn't entirely make out what he said, but it was along the lines of, should be Rosie having this conversation. Darius gave a resigned sigh.
Here's the thing about Paul Meyer. Everyone works for the families. Everyone.
What do you mean? You don't, and aren't there independent businesses?
No. It's everyone, he said bluntly. Every business. The parts, the food vendors, even the beggars.
But not the blacksmiths, right? Eliza seemed emphatic about that.
Darius nodded. Aye. The law says that mages, clergy, mercenaries and blacksmiths can't be directly employed by a family. But whose kids do you think get accepted into that mages college? Or the clergy? Ain't no street urchins. Mercenaries aren't much better.
How do you mean?
Somebody don't need to own something to control it. Take a look at any mark company with a long-term contract with the city as guards or part of the standing army. Every one of them is made up of folk who are connected to the same family somehow. Every one of them is made up of folk who are connected to the same family somehow. Sure, that ain't where their pay comes from, not technically, but when every mark in a company has loved ones employed by the same family, you can bet it ain't the company boss calling the shots.
As for blacksmiths... Oh, no, that's still him.
Calling the shots. As for blacksmiths, it's largely the same deal unless you're a transplant like me.
I was wondering about that. Why are blacksmiths treated differently?
We make the hardware,
Darius said, gesturing to the racks of weaponry and armor strewn around the shop.
Our sales are controlled to make sure no family gets an advantage. If a family had blacksmiths of their own, it would be an arms race.
Has that happened before?
Darius nodded.
Aye, a long time ago. Civil war. Family against family. Paul Meyer almost ceased to exist. Fortunately, the families had enough wits to know that if the mages and blacksmiths weren't dependent, it would keep happening until Paul Meyer was destroyed.
Isn't that an easy restriction to get around? What's to stop a family from hiring smiths from elsewhere or buying weapons outright?
Hey, you said the mages and blacksmiths weren't dependent instead of independent.
Fortunately, the families had enough wits to know that...
Got it.
Fortunately, where to go? Fortunately, the families had enough wits to know that if the mages and blacksmiths weren't independent, it would keep happening until Paulmeyer was destroyed. To exist. Fortunately, the family
were buying weapons outright.
Nah. The family swore their edict in front of Casseron. The family swore their edict in front of Casseron, the god of the forge. He's the one that enforces it now, and a god won't be fooled by a bit of straw tossed over a wagon load of swords. He's the one that enforces it now, and a god won't be fooled by a bit of straw tossed over a wagon load of swords.
Beth's eyebrows rose over Darius's casual mention of a god getting involved in city politics. While she knew some details of Angela's druidic class and who Enad...
Enad? Is it Enid? Enad, right.
While she knew some details of Angela's druidic class and who Enad was, the idea of gods being a literal reality would take some getting used to. "What about the mages?" Peter asked. "Are they bound to neutrality by some sort of god as well?" Darius's eyes darted around nervously.
They got their own methods, but they're a secretive bunch." He shook his head. "Ain't a secret I want to know, either. You don't mess around with the college."
Beth didn't like the sound of that, especially if it was something her kids might get mixed up in.
Should I be concerned about Mark going there?
Aye, you should. But it'd be worse if he didn't, Darius said. He can do magic. He can do magic, and folks who come to Palmyre. He can do magic, and folks who come to Palmyre that can do magic had best square things away with the college right quick. They don't take kindly to magic users who ain't under their thumb.
There was an edge of bitterness to that last sentence, but Darius pushed it aside and placed a hand on Beth's shoulder.
That last sentence there, he's referring to his wife.
Right.
Magic had best square things away with the college right quick. They don't take kindly to magic users who ain't under their thumb.
There was an edge of...
Right quick. They don't take kindly to magic users who ain't... Right quick. They don't take kindly to magic users who ain't under their thumb. Right quick. They don't take kindly to magic users who ain't under their thumb. Don't you be worrying about Mark. That lad can handle himself. And if he can't, well, he's a legend, ain't he? At least he'll be free of the families, no matter what happens.
Which brought them back to the matter at hand.
The families. Right,
Beth said, rubbing the back of her neck.
There's really no way to avoid working for them?
Darius hummed and hawed.
Some, but not many. The travelling mercenaries are probably the biggest, or the rangers, like Eliza. But those are dangerous jobs, and they only keep their distance from the families, 'cause they're rarely in Palmyre. No family wants to risk one of their kids as a low-level merc or ranger anyway, so they just let the poor folks throw themselves into the fire, then hire whatever lunatics survive long enough to build a decent renown.
Well, that option certainly wouldn't work. The last thing Beth wanted was for her husband to become some kind of killer for hire because she didn't want him working for a family. For hire because she didn't want him...
One more time.
The last thing Beth wanted was for her husband to become so... The last thing Beth wanted was for her husband to become some kind of killer for hire because she didn't want him working for a family.
If it's any consolation, Should your husband be good enough with the numbers, he'll make enough to support the whole lot of you. Not well. You won't be dining on basilisk any time soon, but it'll keep the rest of you out of the family's claws. That ain't nothing.
Okay, she said, finally forced to concede. She looked at Peter, who didn't appear wildly excited after Darius's doom and gloom, but his brow was determined. But his brow was determined.
Looks like you're on the job market, love.
Peter nodded. All right. Oop! He cut himself off as a piece of paper appeared in front of him. Opening it up, he said, "It's a quest. Get a job, slacker." Get a job, slacker. Beth sighed and forced a smile. Well,
I guess that settles it. Be careful, okay?
I will.
All right, then. What else can I do for you? Fair warning, I got a bit of work to do today. You want Gavin to show you around the city?
Actually, that would be great,
Beth said, with Peter nodding in agreement. The boy seemed excited by the prospect as well. Maybe too excited, given Darius's frown.
This ain't about visiting all your friends, you hear? Just give 'em a sense of where their house might end up each morning. I don't need you dragging them out to the Port District or some nonsense like that.
Sure thing, Da.
Gavin said. He looked at Beth and Peter.
Let's go.
The boy hopped off his stool and was heading for the door when Darius held out a meaty hand, stopping the lad in his tracks.
Not so quick. These folks are missing a couple of things. The
blacksmith went inside the house and emerged with a small bag that he tossed at Peter. The action caught Peter off guard, and the bag went sailing straight through his hands before bouncing off a table and dropping to the floor with a clinking noise.
God damn it,
he muttered. Beth snickered and bent to pick up the bag, but before she could stand up, a second bag came lancing through the air directly at her head. On instinct, she reached up with her left hand and snagged the bag out of midair an instant before it would have... On instinct, she reached up with her left hand and snagged the bag out of midair an instant before it would have beamed her in the head.
Looks like we know who got the dexterity in the family,
Darius said as he walked over to the rack.
What are your strength stats?
20.
14.
Darius stared at her.
14? You've got to be kidding.
I've never been a large girl. It can't be that bad.
He shook his head.
2. Gavin, what's your strength?
It's 16, Da,
the boy said brightly. Beth's eyes went wide. She stared at the boy.
That can't be possible.
In response, Gavin strode over to a workbench, picked up a large hammer, and started swinging it around with a gleeful smile on his face.
That's my good hammer, lad. Put it down,
Darius barked. He turned his attention back to Beth. I don't know what things are like where you come from, but round here you'd best remember that a parent... I don't know what things are like where you came from. I don't know what things are like where you come from, but round here you'd best remember what appearances... Come on, Burp, stop it. Get out or... something. Sheesh. But round here you'd best remember that
But round here, you best remember that appearances don't always match stats. My boy works his strength constantly because he wants to be a blacksmith. And you don't get the quest unless you have 20 strength by the time you turn 12. You're 14? That's a child stat.
Surely it's not that unusual, Peter said, coming to her defense. My endurance was 14. My endurance was 14 when we arrived as well.
Yeah? And what is it now?
Peter consulted his tome. It's up to 16. Darius shook his head.
See? We call anything below 16 a child stat because you pretty much only see it in child. We call anything below 16 a child stat because you pretty much only see it in kids or the infirm. Physical stats are the easiest to train, and the lower they are, the easier they are to raise. Since you all just made a mighty trek through the wilderness, your tomes should have gotten your physical stats up to 16 at a minimum by now, no matter what you arrived with.
He shook his head.
A strength of 14? Something's up, me dear. Something's up, my dear. Mark my words.
Beth frowned as a piece of glowing paper unfolded in front of her. Quest assigned. The missing stats.
I don't remember. Is it...
Beth is the one whose tome guide is actually nice and cares about her.
Right.
She's not jaded yet, her tome guide.
This is the Beth one. Okay, so let me see.
In book 1, her tome guide starts talking like right away at the start of her chapter.
Cool.
The world raced up at Beth in an increasing frenzy of acceleration. It began to dawn on her that she wasn't actually going to slow down. At all. And considering that her velocity had left behind the triple digits some time ago, her brain now shifted from concern over her well-being to wondering just how much damage she was going to do to the forest when she hit the planet, going faster than the speed of sound. Clenching her teeth and wincing at the prospect of what was to come, Beth watched, paralyzed, as the ground flew up faster and faster until she finally hit the ragged dirt and every ounce of momentum vanished, leaving her standing quietly on the edge of a clearing in the middle of a forest. What do you have with you? Beth assessed herself, noticing right away that her clothes had been replaced with some sort of local garb made of rough, next to her and stood upright in a proper posture, then closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting it out in one smooth exhale that pushed all the air out of her lungs. She continued 2 more times, the yogic breathing bringing her a calm that would allow her to deal with the current situation. The moment Beth opened her eyes, a small flare of yellow light appeared in front of her, and a single piece of paper appeared, unfolding from an impossibly small size before stopping and floating in midair. Beth grabbed the paper and read its contents.
New general skill learned. Yoga. Level 22. Tier 2.
3 breaths, a sense of calm.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And a new skill. Very well done. It's rare for someone to bring a new skill to Arenia at such a high level of expertise.
All right, got it.
Stats.
You have discovered that for some reason your strength stat is being actively limited and does not reflect your true capability. Find out why.
Reward for success. Recovery of your strength scat.
Strength scat.
Recovery of your strength stat. Penalty for failure. Permanent limitation of your strength stat, which will greatly restrict your chances of survival.
Note. Come on, Beth. You can do this.
Beth stared at the paper for a while before taking out her tome and placing the note gently between the pages. A knot tied in her stomach, and, after a moment's consideration, she opened her status page and read the full contents.
This is the first time we've seen her stat page.
Okay.
Elizabeth Beth Sullivan. Renown, level 13, unclassed. Species, human. Age, 44. Experience, 35,200. Experience to next level, 6,300. Base attributes. Strength, 14.
Do you want me to say something about the little... It's not quite an asterisk. It looks almost like a tiny sword here.
Yeah, it's like how it's referring to the footnote at the bottom of the...
Okay, so maybe I should just say footnote?
Yeah.
Strength, 14. Footnote. Constitution, 17. Endurance, 16. Dexterity, 21. Willpower, 17. Intelligence, 17. Charisma, 23. Luck, 19. Average, 18. Abilities: Boon, Deus Ex Machina. Traits: Evolving, Human. General skills: Tier 2, Acting, 20. Dancing, 22. Improv, 20. Mathematics, 22. Obfuscation, 20. Singing, 22. Writing, 24. Yoga, 22. Tier 1, Climbing, 18. Dodge, 12. Jumping, 10. Tier 0, Pickpocket, 1. Rope use, 4. Taunting, 1. Survival skills: Tier 1, Hiking, 10. Tier 0, Campcraft, 3. Field Medicine, 3. Fishing, 6. Sense Danger, 1. Snares, 2. Stealth, 2. Fighting Styles: Tier 2, Judo, 29. Tier 1, Jiu-Jitsu, Japanese, 15. Active quests: Find Grandpa Jack, Part 1. The Missing Stats, Part 1. Profession: All Eyes on Me. Available, not accepted. Strength footnote: Artificially reduced. Quest connected. That wasn't good. Looking up at Darius, she said,
Thank you for that information, but our stats are what they are. Is there a reason you were asking about them?
He nodded and turned to the weapons rack, grabbing 3 knives, a dagger, and a short sword.
These are for your family,
he said, placing the weapons on a table.
Knives for you two and Mark, a dagger for Beth, and a sword for Petey here. Mark's got his staff. That thing looks right nasty enough to scare off most folks. Now, neither of you will be much good with those weapons, but at least they match your builds. As for the purses I gave you, that's just some walking around money in advance of the silverware sale. I'll let you eat, but I wouldn't be... It'll let you eat, but I wouldn't be buying new boots or anything.
Just looking at the weapons made Beth grimace.
That's not necessary.
Darius waved her off.
Don't worry. It's the least I can do.
No, I meant the weapons. They're not necessary,
she said, pushing them aside.
But the loan is very generous, thank you.
This ain't up to debate. This ain't up to debate. This ain't up to debate.
There we go. Darius said, pushing the weapons back towards her.
Walk around this city without any weapons. Walk around this city without any weapons, and one of two things is going to happen. Walk around this city without any weapons, and one of two things is going to happen. Walk around this city without any weapons, and one of two things is going to happen. Look weak, and they'll drag you into an alley and cut your throat. Cut your throat. Look weak, and they'll drag you into an alley and cut your throat for the shirt off your back. Look strong, and someone will think you have some magecraft squirreled away. The college don't take kindly to folks pretending to be mages.
Beth stared at the table in distaste, but didn't know how to respond. "What about our daughter?" Peter asked seamlessly, absolving Beth of any need to continue the conversation. He knew where her aversion to violence came from, after all. "Do you have anything Angela could use?" Darius snapped his fingers.
You mentioned she'd arrived. Glad that worked out. Any sign of the old man?"
They shook their heads, and Darius nodded solemnly.
"Well, if he ain't dead yet, he must be up to something important. As for your daughter, I'll grab her a knife and a weapon. Any idea what her stats are? Unless she's got a class, of course."
"Actually, she's a druid."
"Really?"
Darius said, surprise evident in his voice.
"Not much I can do for her, then. Druids can't use forged metal. Does she have a shillelagh?"
Peter looked at Beth in confusion. "Is that some kind of animal?"
"It's a weapon. Looks like a wood club. Tell her to come find me when she picks one up."
"Okay, I'll let her know," Peter said. He looked at Beth with concern. "You okay with this?" "I know. Well, you know."
Of course I'm not okay with it, she replied truthfully. Do I have a choice, though?
His pinched face and apologetic look was all the answer she needed. Grimacing, Beth picked up the dagger and knife, Darius helping her affix them to her belt. When he was done, she could feel them hanging there. The tangible weight reminding her of their presence. She didn't know whether she was more repulsed by having the weapons or the fact that she felt safer for their presence.
Okay, we should go,
she said once Peter was similarly armed. She turned to Darius.
We've taken up enough of your time, and you've been more than helpful. Thank you.
Not a problem in the slightest. Don't let my lad drag you off into any trouble.
I won't die,
Gavin said, hopping off the table where he'd taken a seat and heading out of the forge. Beth said her goodbyes to Darius and followed after him. She felt Peter's hand snake into her own and gave it a quick squeeze. It would be fine. They'd manage. They had no other choice. All right, cool. That is one more cold read done for the day. Let's see. Tomorrow's my last one of the cold reads, and then I'll be going at a faster pace. So, you guys, again, noon Central tomorrow. And don't forget to check all the links in the description. You can find Arenia Book 1 in audio there. You can find our website. Don't forget we have a bunch of stuff that just released on our website, so go check out, all the cool free stuff, and there's cool stuff to buy as well. And also, Arenia 2 is out on Kindle already. The link to that is in the description as well. So if you like what you're listening to here and you can't wait for Book 2's audio to come out, go pick that up and start nomming on that right away. Paul, you got anything else to say?
Nope, sounds great. I'm going to go back and when this gets posted and listen to the other stuff just because I can't wait.
Yeah, I was prepared for some turkey action today, so I think you won't be disappointed.
Excellent.
All right, guys, have a good one, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow, noon Central.
All right, good to see everyone.
Bye.